The rear brake on our Ducati Supersports is notorious for fading. I probably need to have mine bled every 6 months if I want to keep it feeling pretty good, at least every 12 months. But for the last 3 or 4 months, I've had virtually no rear brake at all. So today I'm going to bleed it myself and try to follow a few ideas that I've read online for how to do it properly, because there are a few issues with the way the Brembo caliper, for example, has the bleed nipple on the underside, so it's really hard to get all of the air out of it. And the other issue is that the brake lines on these bikes run very close to the catalytic converter and also the rear header, so that brake fluid is under very high heat conditions, which doesn't help the fluid last very long. Anyway, I'm going to have a go at bleeding it, and I'll let you know what I learn. So the method I'm mostly following, I learned from the Ducati Supersport 939 forum, which I've linked to in the description below this video. But the gist of it is the brake caliper comes off the rotor, it passes through the spokes of the wheel, comes back up to the top of the rotor, where when it's remounted up here, the bleed nipple's at the top, which makes it much easier to bleed it the normal way and get all of the air out. So I will give you little updates at each step along the process in case there's something you want to try for yourself. So the first step is to free up the brake lines, and that is by removing this cover underneath, and there are 4 mil hex key bolts along there. These two I can get with a, where did I put it? Just a long Allen key, but the back one and the front one, I needed a short one just to be able to get in there properly. And there's not much of a gap up here because of the catalytic converter and the chain. And now they're free. So next is the 2 brake caliper bolts. There's one up here and there is one here, and they're kind of tricky to get to because of how big the swing arm is and the sprocket. But I'll show you what worked for me. So I've got a 1/4 inch drive, I don't know, what do you call it? It's a flexible shifter, I guess. It's not a ratchet. I got a 10 mil long socket here, which holds the 6 mil Allen key in the end. And this worked for both of the bolts. And then that worked out to be just the perfect length to fit this in, just close to the edge of the rim there, but that's plenty of space for my hand to get in there and lever on it, and exactly the same for the back bolt. So the caliper's free now. My next challenge is figuring out how people are getting it through the gap in the wheel. This rotor and the wheel are like precisely the same width as the caliper, or maybe it's just a bit of fiddling, but I'll figure it out. I think it's going to help me though to take this, there's a zip tie here holding what might be a speedo cable to the brake line, so I'll just snip that and free it up. It was just a little bit of acrobatics. It kind of needed to dip through, but to bring it out this way, not side on like that, just kind of start it. So the brake caliper is now mounted on the top of the rotor, as you can see, and the bleed nipple is now nice and high to be sure to get all that air out. I've just kind of balanced it here using the paint stirring stick to kind of hold this end, and I've got a short little Allen key through one of the bolt holes of the caliper and one of the holes in the rotor. So it seems okay, and I think I've got enough brake pad on the rotor to aid with the manual bleeding process. I did have to push the brake pads and I guess the cylinders back into the caliper a bit with the paint stirring stick, just so I could more easily get it, slip it back over the rotor, but that was no big deal. So I'm ready to bleed this thing. I have a 11mm little bleeding kit, which is perfect because that's what this thing needs, so that's ready to go. So as it turned out, this bleed nipple is done up super tight, and with the caliper kind of floating on the rotor, I could not get enough force to undo it. So I kind of repositioned it, which I kind of like better anyway. I managed to line it up so I could get an Allen key through 2 holes on the brake rotor, and that kind of held it nice and firm. And then unfortunately, I had to use something quite significant to get that bleed nipple undone, but didn't take any violent force, which was good. So that is now ready to bleed. And my brake fluid of choice this time round is Maxima .4 600+0 fade synthetic formula. Let's hope that works. If it doesn't work, I actually have a backup brake fluid that I'm going to try next time, but I'll let you know about that in a sec. I'll get started flushing this through. Put through, I don't know how many reservoirs, but I have put through probably nearly half that bottle to clean it out. I ended up moving the drain bottle, I don't know. I ended up moving this higher up because there's not a big enough volume in each pump of the rear brake to fill this line with fluid, so air was kind of finding its way back up. So putting the hose higher than the bleed nipple seemed to have made the difference, and I wasn't getting any extra air coming out. Air still was coming out for a little while, just a little tiny stream of bubbles, so I just kept flushing reservoir after reservoir, and I've done a couple of reservoirs now with no air bubbles coming out at all, and I think that's good. And for the first time since I can remember, I feel like I've actually got a pedal now. So I think I will top up that reservoir, lock off that bleed nipple and reassemble, because I reckon Bo now has a rear brake. I've given the caliper really just a light little clean with brake clean, but I want to show you how the brake pads kind of can creep out. You can see that the brake pad's just a little bit proud of the caliper there, I think you can see. I've got to push them all the way back in to get this back onto the rotor. So I'm just giving these caliper mounting bolts a bit of a clean on the threads, just dragging them through a rag where my fingernail's pushing the rag into the threads. They're not too bad, but just clean that old stuff off, and they need a little bit of molybdenum disulfide grease on the threads before putting them back in. They're supposed to be torqued to 25 Newton meters. I'll see if I can get any kind of torque wrench up in there. It was difficult enough figuring out how to get them out. So we'll see how we go. And the bleed nipple, I think that's 4 Newton meters, so that does not have to be done up too tight at all. I'm sorry this isn't super easy to see. My torque wrench has just got, I'm using a shorter socket. Like before, when I was just undoing it, I was using the longer socket and the little 1/4 inch wrench. But to get the whole head of the torque wrench in there, the shorter socket and the same Allen key bit's what I'm using. The problem is that even though this will just fit in behind the sprocket, the handle of it's rubbing on the tyre, so you could see the wheel moving. But I could feel it go around a little bit more. I already had it to 20 Newton meters. I'll just do the back one and see what that feels like and come back and double check the front one. I am wanting to be so careful with doing up these bolts because I have heard some people have stripped them quite easily. There we go, that's at 25 now. No, I don't want to push any more on that, it just doesn't feel right. And I think it's just the angle that's really tricky to get the torque wrench to feel right. I've got a new zip tie up there holding the brake line to that speedo cable, I think. Next is to get them secured back up under the swing arm with that cover. It's all back together. And I did loosen off that top caliper bolt again just a little and retorqued it, and it neatly clicked at 25 Newton meters. So I'm pretty happy about that. So yeah, for the first time in a very long time, my Super Sport has a rear brake. I can feel it. We'll see how long that lasts. And like I said, even though I'm using this Maxima .4 racing brake fluid this time, the one that I had heard about, I'll put a link to in the description, but it's from Canyon Chaser's video. He talks about the same rear brake issue on his Multistrada for the same reasons, actually, that the brake line runs close to the header and the catalytic converter where all the heat is. So he uses Castrol SRF brake fluid. It's not cheap. It's normally, well, I can see it there for, I don't know if this is an Australian website though, for about $100 for a litre. I've seen it up to $140 in Australia for a litre, which is twice the amount of that. So I wouldn't come close to using all of it. But the point about it is that he says he hasn't had to bleed his rear brake for a couple of years, and that sounds really promising. So I'll see how this goes and then decide whether I invest in that much more expensive Castrol brake fluid for next time. I've got the fans on because it's really hot, so it's just blowing me everywhere. I've been working on this for probably 2.5 hours, and that was mostly just figuring out which tools I needed and making sure that I was doing the process right. And I did spend a fair amount of time flushing brake fluid through the system as well. I don't know how long it will take me to do it once I'm a bit more kind of fluid with it. I reckon an hour, so it's not really a problem. So yeah, I think it's just going to be part of the routine maintenance that I do on this bike myself.